Now, Carl, I guess, thank you, please. What would you kind of describe yourself as, right? It's very easy. You got, writers, producers, making films. I mean, you're a jack of all trades, and you've been involved in so many different industries. We're going to talk about one company that you've recently exited because it really is quite a fascinating story. But how would you describe yourself to these wonderful people?
Man, that's a really hard question. I just kind of call myself a creative because I am a bit of a jack of all trades. I don't like the word entrepreneur. However, I love starting things. And yeah, I think we'll probably dig into that a bit, but I do love creating businesses.
So tell us about this thing that you started. You recently sold it for a good sum of money, and I guess take us back to that moment, the genesis of the idea, but also who you were back in those days. Because I think a lot of people, when they've got a little bit of success, it's so much easier to be confident. But when you had very little money, you guys had no money at all when you were in Singapore, which we'll kind of get into. But tell us about, who you were back then and how this idea came to you guys.
I basically had a company called TradeGecko. TradeGecko is an inventory and order management system or software, online software. And we created that through a incubator in Singapore, which that was back in 2012, where we started it. And I'll get into that a little bit more detail. But we recently, in the last few months, sold that to Intuit, which is probably one of the biggest software accounting softwares in the world. They do QuickBooks and Quicken software, and we sold that for 147 million New Zealand dollars.
Wow, 147 million.
Yeah.
And did you get any of that or?
Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations. Let's put his card behind the bar as well.
No.
He can go halves with Tim Finn. Now, I guess we talked about this earlier in the week around it not necessarily being a great environment in New Zealand to create that company, and that was one of the reasons why you went to Singapore. Tell us what it was like back in 2012.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to about 2010. I was actually running a clothing label called Crowded Elevator. Hamish bought a lot of my clothes, and so it looks so good. And that was like, we're doing t-shirts and streetwear and all sorts of things. And back then, there was no TradeGecko. Like Shopify was just starting out, started using that. We ran our entire business on spreadsheets. Like everything was, all our, orders were on spreadsheets, our manufacturing run was on spreadsheets, everything was, on spreadsheets. So, of course, it doesn't matter how many times you frickin' count these things, there's always something wrong. So we go through manufacturing and all of a sudden there's like, we're missing stock or whatever. It was just so annoying. Long story short, the global financial crisis came, knocked that out. And then I started working with my friend Cameron, and we're building websites and stuff. And we came up with a few ideas, and we looked around at like some incubators and stuff in New Zealand, and there just wasn't anything really happening in New Zealand. Startup at the time was a dirty word. There was one startup meeting in Auckland. There was 20 people, and it was the same 20 people every 2 weeks. It was not a big thing. Corporates haven't got involved with it all. Like Dropbox, there was only probably a handful of people here and back then that had a Dropbox account. Now probably everyone has one or two. So we looked around at going, okay, well, we met a few investors in New Zealand. And after meeting them, we were so bamboozled by the lack of understanding that they had that we were like, New Zealand just doesn't have the ecosystem we're looking for to build this. So, or whatever that was. So we looked at, we applied for an incubator in Sydney and one in Singapore. Singapore said they were looking for international, teams. Sydney one didn't, although it didn't not say they were, so we thought we'd give it a go. Anyway, long story short, we got into the one in Singapore. So Christmas Eve, 2011, we got a call saying that we got in. So I had 3 weeks to pack our bags and move to Singapore. So that was hard. Like, we ran through this incubation process and we kind of, it was a great environment. It was international teams. I remember the first day we walked into the space, and this beautiful co-working space and stuff, and we meet all the teams and things, And one of the mentors said, "Oh, the Kiwi team's here, yay," and all the rest of it. And then from the back of the room, who's now a good friend of mine, Tudor from Canada, just stands up and goes, "Oi, sheep shaggers." So we knew we were going to hit it off. Long story short, the 3 months that we ran through that incubation process, we really kind of dug down into the idea. We were really challenged by all the mentors within that program. It was tough. It was really, really tough. Like, we were working 18 hours a day. I'm not kidding. Like, we'd only go home to sleep. We'd be first in, last to leave. We worked our asses off. And that whole 3 months was literally just trying to work out what the problem, how big is this problem, and validating if this is even worth doing. This is before a logo and everything.
I guess to look at this as a way to kind of inspire, like, what gave you the confidence at that age, or even with that level of expertise, to actually travel overseas with the idea of creating a business, right?
I mean, it was scary, right? Like, we're leaving everything behind to go and just do this thing that may or may not work. But it was an opportunity that I couldn't turn down. It was only 3 months that turned into 2 years for me, and turned into, well, currently unforeseeable future for Cameron. But yeah, that was hard. Like, we had $3,000. I had $3,000 in my pocket at the time. Moved over to Singapore. So we could own a business over there, but because we couldn't afford to pay ourselves, we couldn't have an employment pass. So an employment pass, you can't get a SIM card, you can't get rent, you can't get utilities, you can't live in Singapore without an employment pass. So we had to do all these back sort of sideways deals, and we found basically an abandoned house that they were going to demolish soon, so they could tell us to leave at any time. They kind of knew we didn't have employment passes, so they had to ask, and we'd just say, "Yeah, we'll send it to you soon." It was. So
you think back to the Carl, right? I want you to picture this Carl. He's sitting in Singapore. He's living in an abandoned house. He's got $3,000 in his bank account. How does he possibly think that there's a storyline where he's on stage one day at the Phoenix Summit? Okay, no, no, he's on stage one day because this company sells for 150 million. I mean, I think there's those great sort of stories of people giving up just before a breakthrough, and I think timing is so important. I encourage everyone to watch this great TED Talk, which really talks about, forget about the idea or the team or the financing. The number one thing in most businesses being successful is the timing.
Absolutely.
And so I know that timing played quite a part.
Massive part.
But how do you stick in there long enough to, I guess it's...
Look, one of the big things is finding the right opportunity. And for us, we knew it was a good opportunity. Because it's huge. Like, we're the software that runs the day-to-day business for businesses that sell products to other businesses. Like, that's pretty frickin' big. So the only basically what we're doing is we saw an opportunity to take what SAP and NetSuite were doing, and those are big, horrible pieces of software that are basically just input fields, and there's no UI on them at all, and then take what Shopify were doing with this beautiful, modern SaaS interface, and bring it together into what I wanted for the clothing label, to run my clothing label. So we looked at what the problems were in my old business and really wrap it into this new way of thinking, because SaaS was not a big thing back then. So now you've got Xero, you've got Vend, you've got all sorts of online softwares. We got in right at the start of when SaaS really became a thing. And it was actually at a point where I knew it was a problem for me. So now we started validating this idea, right? And this is something I want to dig into a bit. So we started validating this idea, and it's not about, and I see a lot of people fail at this so much, because they all want to find, their bias, right? They want to make this work. What you should be doing is trying to find out how it's going to fail. One big thing, actually, was a key part in driving forward for us was I started doing some research around keyword analysis. Inventory management software was searched like 18,000 times a month, like just in America alone. And I was like, that's a pretty big, like when you compare it to other things, like that's huge. Like, and it's so specific that we knew that these people were looking for a solution. So then we started validating this a bit more. And we first actually started going around Singapore. And we'd go to these businesses in Singapore and we'd start talking to them and trying to, validate, look, this is how you do your business. Have you looked for this solution? What are the biggest problems? Blah, 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 blah. You never tell them what you're doing until afterwards. Otherwise, it just muddles the whole thing. We found very quickly that Singapore was not our market. A lot of businesses back then were still literally using books to write down what they're selling and stuff. It was archaic. So then we started going, okay, cool. Let's try America, New Zealand, Australia. We're in Singapore. We had to start calling Americans. So I had to go to the office at like 2 a.m. and literally start picking up the phone. And what I'd do a search for like powered by Shopify and just bring up all these, brands, and I'd start calling them and be like, hey, I'm like we're working on this, project, and we love what you do, and we think this could help. Can we ask you some questions? And they're like, yeah, sure. There's one thing people love doing is talking about themselves or their business. So don't ever be scared to like ask people for their advice because they love giving it. So then we started talking to these people about, they love this stuff. Then at the end you go, oh, great, because, well, this is what we're trying to do. And honestly, people would be like, oh my God, when can I have this? Like, give this to me now. We'd have, we actually had a phone call after we put up like a one-page holding page on the website. We had a phone call from the company in Hong Kong. They make all of the high-end sunglasses. And he's like, how much do I need to pay for you guys to come see me and you build this for me? And we turned it down. We're doing this for everyone, and yeah.
I guess, look, it's an amazing story, and I guess Carla's going to be here if you want to dig into it deeper. For me, you look at the ideas that have been successful, certainly from a New Zealand perspective. I remember Nick Mowbray, the entrepreneur, sort of said to me, you always want to be playing in the big end of the sandpit, right? You look at all the models that they're trying to do. It's trying to solve a problem and trying to make something that's already there, but it's been around forever and it's clumsy and people don't like it better. You know? And in some ways, what you're sort of saying is the same thing, right? You're looking for a problem that frustrates people, whether it be Uber or Airbnb, these things answered a question. So if you're talking to everyone here about where to find inspiration from, just in closing, because we're going to have to wrap it up, what would you say? Exactly, yes. Look,
honestly, I can do this for hours.
We're going to do a keynote with Carl at a later date. What would you say? Because I think that's so important, that trying to break it. I love that idea. To look for, listen, it's been a long day. To look for inspiration, right? And
yeah. So for me, I guess the biggest takeaway I want to put today is like work out the biggest opportunity. Don't go for something small. Look at the timing as well. Like, see how saturated the market is already. One of the things you don't ever want to do is try and change your behavior. So that's what we're talking about, like looking at like, okay, these big conglomerates like SAP and so forth, they cost, tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars to install. And small businesses didn't have access to that. So that's when we're like, okay, this is a big thing. This is part of, a wholesale business. Let's just create something that's for this sector.
And look, just last question to wrap it up. What's the industry like now here? If these guys know people or they've got ideas themselves and they want to go into an incubator or they want to find some sort of support or mentoring system. I know there's Ice House, there's a lot of other places, but what's your take on it?
Look, so I have done some mentoring with Ice House. I still like the Flux Incubator there. Still keep in touch with those guys. I think it's a good program. The capital in New Zealand is definitely got a lot better. When we started, it was all like, ex-corporates trying to give advice to startups. And it just doesn't work. Like, they only know the slither. They've never done anything before. So what... Yeah. True.
Yeah.
So what's happening? And we saw this years ago, where like America, there was so much money going around because they had people that have done like we've done, built it, exited, know what the fuck they're doing, and now can actually do smart money at decent valuations.
So it's the best time right now to be a young creative, and I guess it's great to have people like you that have proven that it can be done. So thank you so much for being here, Carl. Thank you for giving up your time. And the other good news is that, now that you've got all this money, are you looking to invest in some ideas? Because I've got 2 or 3 I'd like to throw at you. One of them is to buy me dinner, and some beers, and what else? But in all seriousness, with that success, what's next?
It's funny, like the money doesn't bring more happiness or anything like that, but it doesn't alleviate anything really. It doesn't. My lifestyle hasn't changed. I'm still already living that lifestyle, but
Yes.
No, I just have to pay for it. But look, it's opportunity now, right? Like, so if I'm going to do a new startup or whatnot, my kind of like framework is 200K in 2 years. So give it 2 years and 200K. If it doesn't work, walk away. But that's kind of like, I think, my go-to framework.